Good morning, you guys. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with Melco's application team, and I think we're live. Yep, I see Facebook and YouTube. All right. Well, this is our Design Shop Talk. We do these weekly, or at least I try to. Sorry I didn't get on yesterday. Had some issues with my children, so I figured rather than trying to rush through this to deal with it, it'd be better just to move it to Friday, which everyone seems to like Fridays better in general. But all right, so we have just a handful of questions. If you have questions while we're live, feel free to type them into the comments section. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can just type in your questions. If you see me looking off to the side, that's what I'm looking for, is trying to keep track of any questions that come in, because I'm here by myself with my puppy. All right, so let's see. I'll start off with the questions I was given ahead of time. All right, so I have DesignShop, and I was wondering about removing hidden stitches when overlapping letters or designs. Okay, so one thing to remember with this sort of thing is not all the time do you actually want to remove the overlap. Okay, so yes, of course, if you're stacking, fill upon fill and then lettering, it gets cumbersome, and yeah, you want to remove some of the bulk underneath it. But, sometimes if you're just putting lettering on top of fill, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to remove the fill underneath, because you might be adding splits along the path where you end up having to sew into things. The pathing gets a little bit wrong, so you might end up with additional errors with gaps in your sewing and things like that. So just keep in mind, it's not necessarily something you want to do all the time. So the question then becomes, how do we do it? All right. Oh, good morning from Chicago. It's nice and cool up there. We are at a balmy, I think it was 79 degrees today. I'm much happier in the warm. But welcome. Thank you for joining. All right. So if I've got a fill, so we're just going to pretend this is a design. All right. So I've got a fill, and now I'm going to put some text on it. All right. Let's make it bigger and blockier, so it makes block. That's a bulk. It's a beefy font. There we go. All right, so let's say I've got that. Now, if you've got overlapping shapes, so we'll do it a few ways, text as well as multiple overlapping shapes. All right, so let's say I've got a fill on top of a fill. Do I really need this full box to sew? Oh, good morning from Nebraska. Welcome. All right, so do I really need to sew this entire box under here when I've got this one sewing on top? Probably not. So how can we remove that quickly and easily? So you would want to, oops, let me get back to my project view. There we go. All right, so you select your primary shape first, the one that you're going to remove stitches from. Choose that first. Okay, so I'm select that one. Hold the Control key down on your keyboard, and with that, then click on your second shape. All right, up here you'll see I've got a Combine Elements button, and I also have a Subtract Elements. All right, so if I right click on the Subtract Elements, so before I actually click it, if I right click on it, I can set what the overlap is. So if it's set to 0, it's going to subtract line to line. Is that a good practice? Probably not. I mean, it really depends on what you're doing, but if it's line to line, you might end up with gaps in your sewing. If you're going to go back over with a satin stitch, maybe that's okay. I tend to want 5 to 7 points, usually 7 to 10 points of overlap. It's a personal preference. Is there a right answer? No. It's what is your application? What are you doing? What's the final design going to look like, and what makes sense for what you're doing? So I'm going to set it to a 7-point overlap, and now I'm going to click on that button, and what you'll see is now all those stitches that were under there are gone. Okay, and if I zoom in and turn off 3D, you can see I've got overlap. That's the 7-point overlap that I told it to leave. All right, so that makes sure I've got just the edges overlap, but I don't have, bulletproof embroidery of embroidery on top of embroidery on top of embroidery. All right, well, what if I want to remove text underneath the ears? Now, like I said, this is not always the best practice, but let's just pretend for my application it will work. Again, what do? Select your shape first that you're going to remove stitches from. Good morning, Lorena in Alaska. Ooh. All right, so select your shape first, hold the control key, and then click on your lettering. From there, you then go subtract elements, and poof, now I've got some stitches removed. Okay, now what if you don't like these? What if you decide after the fact that I shouldn't have taken those stitches out? I want them back, give them back, right? So how do I remove holes from shapes? Okay, well, select the shape I want. So you can see if I turn all this off, now I have holes in there. All right, so select the shape, left click on the hole, you'll see it draws a box around the hole. Now I can hit the delete key and it will remove the hole for me. And I can do that for as many or as few of these as I want. Okay, so there you go. That's removing some holes. Okay, any questions so far? Nope. All right, so what, did that answer the question? I believe it did. Removing hidden stitches when overlapping. Yeah. Let's see. Someone just typed in a few questions, so let me scroll up so I can see them. I was doing 2 outlines of states in satin. I tried what you're doing. Okay, so the subtract doesn't work on satin stitches. So what would you do for the satin stitches? Well, that you've got to go split the element up and delete it. So let me go do that. All right, so let's say, here, let's just do it this way. I'm going to select the shape. No, I'm going to redraw it. Sorry, I changed my mind. All right, so I'm going to draw another box. And I'm going to, this, again, I do this a lot to show how to quickly convert. So if I have this shape, I hold my shift key down and click on the satin stitch. Now I have a satin stitch border. I'm going to make it wider. 40, and let's say I'm going to select that one, and again, make it a satin stitch by holding shift and clicking on satin. There. All right, so if I turn off my fills, now I've got these overlapping things, right? And I want this gone, and I want, well, maybe I just want to remove the stitches underneath there, okay? Or maybe I want to remove this whole segment. You do it the same way, right? So if I come over here, I would select a point, and now I just clicked on my wireframe to add those 2 points. So now I can come here and say split element at selected points, and then I could actually just delete that point there. All right, so I just removed those stitches that were underneath there. All right, so now you'll see I don't have satin stitches running under this anymore. Okay, now what about if I want to remove this whole section? Well, all I've got to do is come add a wireframe point here, and I can either select these wireframe points and hit delete now that I split it, that's not a word, sorry. Now that I split it, so if I click on those points, that point right there, split element, now I can select that entire segment and hit delete. Yeah, so subtract works with fills. It doesn't work with satins. The satins, you've got to go through and split up your elements and remove the stitch, remove the segments that you don't want. Okay. All right. That also works with your columns and your walk stitches and all those sorts of things. You split them, delete the segments you don't like. All right. So what else do we have? Oh, someone else typed something in. Let me scroll down and see. All right, how do you create a shadow effect with lettering? So let's break the question up into a few. This is typed in on Facebook. So that was one question. So where's Design Shop? There we are. Okay, so Sam, where is it? In object, shadow. And I usually just play with it. There. And, oops, undo. I'm clicking the wrong thing to move it. There we go. So if I move the lettering around, you'll see it creates the shadow different. So if I don't like where it put the shadow, I can click on the lettering and move it around. All right, so that creates the shadow. And also when you have a border around a logo, how do you get a gradient fill look to your stitches? So gradient on satin stitches, I don't suggest it. Let me put it that way, because part of what gradients do is burying the stitches by having needle penetrations, right? So that's better on fills because you have those needle penetrations. You can play with the lower layers being longer stitches, your above layers being shorter stitches, so that nests the thread nicely and you get a nice gradient look to it. So doing it on fills is easy, right? So I can select this, hold my shift key, click on the fill, so I have a fill. I can go into properties, go to effects, custom density, apply. I can even turn on a blend, hit apply, give it another color. And you can see you can get different effects, and then you just play with these densities. So let's say I want it to go down to 3, maybe up to 15. I don't know. I usually just turn on auto apply. I know Nate hates this, but I usually turn on auto apply and just start moving points around, adding points until I get the look that I want. Okay, so that gives you gradients on there. Now, if you want to do it on satin stitches, you can. So if I come in again, click on the satin stitch, go to properties, go to effects, custom density, blend, apply, give it another color. You can do it that way. Good morning in Oklahoma. All right. So what you'll see is that puts, two on top of each other. It varies it around. So then again, you play with the densities to get the coverage you want. So you can see it's kind of sparse. So I'd come in here and say, okay, maybe we want that smaller, and maybe this a little smaller too. Or maybe I want to do a linear look to it. And you can see it's denser at one end, it's lighter there, so you can get a gradient. Then it really comes down to saturation levels and coloring things right, so that you can get that gradient look. But pay attention, it's just thread laying on top of each other. So it does not, I've done it, it looks okay. It works way better on doing fill stitches. All right. So let's see what else. So Carol, did that help any? Hopefully it did. All right. The other way you can always do it is to overlap satin stitches, where you'd have, instead of using the blend, let me go look at that real quick. Copy, paste. So I have a satin on top of a satin, cancel that, move this one down. There we go. So I have a satin on top of a satin. So I can change this one to be, instead of auto density, I can come into the density. So how I got here is I double clicked on the stitch, it appeared here, and 8, 15, something like that. Turn off the underlay. And again, you get the same type of effect. But now you can split it up, change the colors, do whatever you want. Okay. Carol, I don't tend to click on links during this because it kicks me out of my stuff. So I will have to go back and look at that after the fact. So if you, I don't know if Scott, or if you can put a screenshot in the comments, I can look at that real time. All right, but if not, I will look at it after the fact and get back to you. All right, so we did that. What other questions do we have? I'm just starting applique. First step is to trace on stabilizer. Second step to add plastic window. Step add felt and finish. All right, lots of false thread breaks when sewing just on stabilizer. Okay, so false thread breaks. When you're sewing on stabilizer, it's thinner, right? So if your active feed number is too high, then it's going to be feeding so much thread that it doesn't realize it's making a stitch. All right. So what I would suggest with that is to lower your active feed number. So let's say you're running it at 8. Well, I'll try 4 for that step. So decreasing your active feed number on your OS will make it run. All right. So that's what I would do. You can always do settings by color and stitches with 3 wider and narrow on the border. Okay. Carol, I'm struggling trying to understand what you're saying. Let me think about that while I keep talking here. Yeah, so your active feed setting, lower the number because that will tighten the thread up. You won't get your false thread breaks there. The cost factor tool, pros and cons. I don't personally use it. You know, a lot of things go into determining your costs, right? You have your overheads, you have electricity, you have admin time, you have hooping time. If you have employees, you're going to have that. You have benefits for your employees. If you're, depending on how large your shop is, you buy supplies at different places, right? So our costs of supplies all vary. You know, you might buy stabilizer for $80, but then someone else buys it for $70. I mean, there are so many factors that go into cost that it's really important, you know, as a business, in my opinion anyway, to understand what are your overhead costs and, you know, how much do you want to make per hour for running your machine, and kind of back into your pricing that way. One of the worst things I always see is when people, you know, go, oh, well, so-and-so charges XYZ, so I'm going to charge the same thing. Well, you might, you know, based on your costs, you might actually be undercutting yourself, you know. So the cost factor tool, it will give you, there's a video that was done on it a while back, and we'll put a link up there that goes through it. It's really it gives you a nice baseline and a starting point for costs, but keep in mind it's always good to kind of do that exercise of determining what your costs are to make sure it makes sense. You know, that what you put in there gives you, you know, has you pricing things appropriately. Okay, so I'll get you a link. I think we have a video that Mike Doe did a while back on there, so we'll try to get you that. Has anyone digitized faces? Yes, lots of people digitize faces. Lee Caroselli has, you know, a while back did an Elvis stamp, which is outrageously beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I didn't Google ahead of time to see what the Google is for it, but it's a portrait. It's got Elvis on a stamp, and it was done in thread, and it's just outrageously beautiful. So, you know, facial feature and doing those sorts of things in embroidery is it's fun, I would guess. Basically, it's neat to do, but it does take a lot of time to do it properly because you've got to make sure you're picking the colors right to get that kind of transition between things, that you're doing all the different highlights to get all the features in there. And it, you know, yes, it can be done. It's a lot of work. Takes a lot of time. I look at those sorts of embroidery projects as art. So not really anything you're going to, you know, poof, done and make a ton of money on. It takes a lot of time to do it. So it would cost quite a bit to do it right and to make it look as beautiful as an Elvis stamp. But yeah, I've seen some pretty outrageous embroidery of different faces, pictures of children, pictures of dogs. It's wild. It's beautiful. But it does take quite a bit of time to digitize properly. Is there a quick way to find jump stitches in the stitch list? All right, so let me go open up. Where's my... All right, this thing, see these little dashed lines? This is an expanded file type. It's a DST, which is an expanded stitch type. You'll see there's these little travel stitch thingies. All right, so how do you find them quickly to be able to delete them? Well, if I come over down here on my project view and click on the stitch view, right here, see these JMP? Those are those jump stitches. Okay, so that's what we want to delete. So yeah, I can come and hold my control key, select those two, hit delete, and then I can start, you know, go scroll to find it. That's no fun. All right, but here, if I, on my keyboard, control F, and then find jump stitch, find next. All right, there's the next one. I can hit delete. I can say find next. Oh, there's the next one. I can then hit delete. So I can quickly navigate through this just by clicking find next. Then I can delete the ones, find next. Oh, there's two more. Delete, delete, find next. Hey, I have no more. Okay, so that lets you get through it really quick. So let me do that one more time since it goes pretty fast. How do I do it? Select my design, come over here, or control F. So control F on the keyboard. I want to find the next jump stitch, next, next. And it navigates you through them so that you can delete them quick. All right. Let's see, we have some questions typed in. I'll do Facebook. And then, all right. How do you move the start and stop locations? Okay, do I still have? No, I don't. All right. So let's say I've got a satin stitch and a run stitch and a fill stitch. Oops, that's another set. Let me make a fill stitch. I'm going to do that guy there. There, cool. All right, so I got 3 different elements. I'm going to go back to my project view, and you'll see if I update my auto trims, I've got trims all over the place, but all of this stuff is touching, so I don't need trims, right? So how do I get rid of those? Okay, so, and that is what you mean, how do you move your starts and stops? All right, so this element started where that green circle is, it ended where the red X is. So right here is where that propeller, see that white X? I call it a propeller. That's what it looks like to me. So I need the start to be there, and I need the stop to be down here, because I want the start to be where the propeller is, because the propeller is where the previous thing ended. So my satin stitch, which was the element before it, it ended up here. And you'll see if I click on the next, the propeller shows where the satin stitch ended, and the green circle shows where it starts. Well, I want the start to be over there. So all I have to do is click on the element that I want to modify, click on this insert entry exit points right here. So if I click on that, I'm going to say start on the propeller, end down here. Cool, so now my start's up here, my end's down here. Well, on this guy, let's pretend my start is over here. If I want to drag the start to start over at this point, all I've got to do is either drag that green circle to the propeller, or another way would be to, again, select my element, click on this insert start stop, click on the propeller, click on the end. Okay, so that moves your starts and stops around. That works, you know, you can do that with lettering too. So, oops. So I have a letter, the green circle is where it starts, the red X is where it ends that. If I want it to start up here, I can just move that and it will repath it so that it starts up there. Okay, let's see. For the underlay, can you change the start and stop? The underlay will start wherever your green circle is, right? So if I move that green circle around, wherever that is where the underlay will start, because the underlay is what stitches first. Okay. Back to my jump stitch questions. Someone asked on YouTube, are tie-ins and tie-offs automatically added when you delete the jump stitches? No. So those jump stitches, it's an expanded stitch type. So hopefully your digitizer already digitized in your tie-offs and tie-outs before they put those jump stitches in there. So it should be, you know, you're deleting the jumps, and as long as you're not over here deleting stitches, so if I come to the top, as long as I'm not deleting these stitches, then the tie-in and tie-outs that were digitized there will stay. Okay. All right. YouTube, we have a question. Can you change the object type if it was sent from a digitizer? Okay, I think what you're asking is, hey, I've got a file from a digitizer. I have a satin stitch. I don't like it. I want it to be a walk stitch. Okay. Yes, with qualifications. It depends on how it was digitized, right? So if they digitized it as a native OFM, then that's straightforward. So you go find your stitch. So although this is not a pretty design, let's pretend this is what I got from my digitizer for whatever reason. All right, so it was digitized native in DesignShop, so changing it to a run stitch is easy. I select what I want to change, and I can either right-click operations, change element type, and I can say make that a bean stitch, and I can replace it. Cool. Now I have a bean stitch. Another way to do that, let's say it's a bean stitch and I want to make it a satin stitch. So you saw me do that using the change element from one type to another. But you can also select it, hold the control key, and click here on my satin stitch. So Control changes, Shift adds. So let's say I want to leave that running stitch, but now I want to add a satin on top of it. I would hold Shift and then click on this guy. Okay. All right. Now, if they sent you an expanded file, so like this guy here, it's an expanded file, and I don't know, this is not a good design for me to do this on. Let's see, do I have another expanded one that, something with borders. I don't see any here. That one has borders. I think that's expanded too. Nope. All right. This isn't expanded. All right. Well, let's say I want this converted over. All right. I don't want a pear. I want a satin stitch shape of the pear. Well, it's all expanded, so I would have to convert to wireframe, and then I would have to play with it, find my shape. Now I have my shape. Now that it's a wireframe, I can hold my Control and change it to a satin stitch. Okay, so like I said, this isn't the best idea for me to demo that, but that's how you would do it. You'd have to take your element and make it a wireframe before you can convert it. So it's always better to get it native as a native OFM file whenever you can. All right, let me check YouTube, see if there's, did that help? All right. Oh, I missed a question on YouTube, sorry. When trying to digitize something, I digitize one part, then I can't see the part underneath it that still needs to be done. Cool. So, show you what I do. All right, let's get some art so we have something to trace. So I'm going to go to Graphics, Butterfly, something to trace. All right, so I'm going to do this badly, but just so you can see what we're talking about. So if I trace this wing, start, stop, stitch direction. Is this how I would do this thing? No, but all right. So I've got this, and if I make it pink or whatever, all right, now I've got to digitize this stuff underneath it. And sometimes, depending on your colors, it can be really hard to see all the art underneath there. So what can you do? A few things. You can turn off that element by just toggling the eyeballs. Or another way you can handle this is you can leave that on, but right here you can show or hide stitches. That leaves the wireframe, so you can see the wireframe, but you don't see the stitches generated. Now, the only caution I would give you to using this is when you turn off stitches, if I deselect it, now I want to select that to turn stitches back on. Where is it? I can't find it. You have to click on it over here in order to be able to reselect it, to then come and right here, I can now show the stitches again. Okay, so personally, I tend to just use the eyeball so I don't have to worry about, so I can see in the tree what is on and off. So now let's say I want this to, undo. Now if I draw another fill for this guy, okay, give it a start, enter, start, stop, stitch direction. All right, so now I've got two, and I can turn back on my other shape, give this a different color, put it in 3D. Okay, like I said, this isn't how I do this one, but you get the idea. All right, so yeah, as you're going through it, like I said, you can turn off stitches by using this guy, and it will leave the wireframe where you can see the wireframe, but you can only select it over here. Now, just because it's not showing them, it will still sew. So turning off the eyeball and turning off that, you send it to OS, it's still going to sew stitches. All right, so it's not like a printer where you hide it and it doesn't print. No, it will still sew it. So if you want it gone, you need to delete the stitches. All right, now if I want to globally turn back all my stitches, I can just click on Design, and again, where I turn those off, I can say Show Stitches. It will turn them all back on. Okay, we had some questions on Facebook. Let me go see. In the OS, every time I bring in a design, I don't have my grid or center line. Is there a setting that will turn this on and keep it on? I would have to go play with that. I think. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'd have to go turn on my machines and go look at that for you. So I'll come back to I always come back to the comments afterwards to check on stuff. So that one, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go look at my machines, and they're in the other room. So I'll try to type in a reply to you after we're done here, when I can go actually look at it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I don't see any other typed in questions that I missed. Quick scrolling to check. Nope. Oh, Carol, what is needed? What I need is to get stitches width to be wider and narrower. Okay, so wider and narrower would be column stitches, right? So let's say I want to start at this width and end at this width. So that's a column stitch. Now, if you just want to take a satin stitch and add randomness to it, well, I can do that too by going into the properties and going to effects, enable random edge, and that will give it a random edge from one side or the other. You can tell it to be right or left. I tend to use this for grass and whatnot, just to add some variation to it. Okay, so, but how you would get varying stitches, that's what your columns are for. You can either use a column 1 or a column 2, and that lets you take a satin stitch and go from wide to narrow and things like that. Okay, so question, how would you put a marrow stitch on my butterfly? Where is my butterfly? Oh, it was in this. Okay, so here's the butterfly. How would I do a marrow of this? Well, first off, I'd have to quick digitize it. I'm just going to auto convert it. Graphic to, oops, wrong one. I don't want that one. I want graphic to embroidery, conversion assistant, and I'm just going to real quick because I just want something to be here. I'm going to turn it to auto convert just so I have some stitches. So if I want to add a border to this, how would I do it? Good morning. Okay. This is how I do it. I go object, generate basting primer. I would do a primer stitch, whatever border you want. Okay. Now clearly I don't want to use it as a primer. I'm just doing that to get this shape that follows my thingy, super technical term here. Actually, I don't like that one. Let's do it again. I'm going to go object, generate primer. I'm going to change it to a primer stitch. Let's make it closer. Let's make it like 30. That's better. Okay. So let's say I want that. Now I'm going to delete one of these because I don't need both. I'm going to select the shape, and I'm going to hold my control key down because I want to switch this from a fill, which is what it is currently. You can see that over here in my project view. It's a complex fill. I don't want it to be a fill. I want it to be a decorative stitch that I can make a marrow. So I'm going to hold my control key, because control replaces it with a walk stitch. So now I've got a walk stitch that I can change to a decorative. That's cute, but not a marrow. So I'm going to make that a marrow stitch. Now, when you're doing this sort of thing, you'd go through and clean up your edges, to make it that. So it's sharp points on marrow. You either have to split it up or adjust it. So I'm just deleting points to clean up these little areas where I don't need all that. That's better. So around this curve, if I hold my shift key, click on it, I can get a curve. Move that around, delete some extra points. So you just play with it until you get the shape to look how you want. Okay. All right, but you can see. All right. I can keep playing with it, but you get the idea. All right, when I did an auto convert, and saved as an OFM and loaded it to OS, it showed the object but with no stitches. Any suggestions on what I did wrong? So when things don't generate stitches, this is just my personal experience, it tends to be related to stitch directions. So I'm gonna delete this. So when I do an auto convert, all right, let me find one. Oh, that's a complex fill. All right, cool. So let me stop it. I just want to move it. All right, so this is a complex fill here, right? So if I if I delete this, or if my stitch directions are angry, and what I mean by that, okay, I'm trying to tell it to do things that it can't do. Notice I've got stitch directions, but there's no stitches generated. That's because the math doesn't compute. I'm telling it to run all my stitches this way, and then and then I'm telling them to run the stitches 90 degrees from it. It's like, it doesn't compute. So you would need to go and delete or fix your stitch directions so that your stitches generate. Okay, so that's what I always look at. So if stitches aren't generating, you do an auto convert, go look at the stitch directions, delete excessive ones, add the correct ones on there, and you'll be good to go. We had a question, how do we do a knockdown? Okay, so that's a knockdown stitch is a primer stitch is what we call it. So you would select whatever shape that you want. We'll also get you a link to a really in-depth video that Scott did on the primer stitch and the basting stitch. But here you go, you'd right click on that, select whatever shape you want to put the primer around. You can either go right click, operations, generate basting primer. Okay, that's one way. You can select it, come up here, object, generate basting primer. It all takes you to the same spot. This drop down, change it to primer. That's that knockdown. And then this border is, how far away do you want it? You want it closer, that would be smaller, right? So a 10 point, there you go. And there's your primer stitch. All right, now if you want to modify it, change it to different patterns, now you've got that, you can do whatever you want with it. Okay, so that would be your primer stitch. Kathy, did that help? Kathy Pop. All right. Oh, on YouTube we have a question, how do we split a design in half? All right, so just because I have it, let's say I want to cut this guy down the middle. What do? I can select one point, hold my control key, select the next point down here. So if I want to cut a straight line between there, split it, now I've got two halves. So I've got a one half and then another. Okay, well, what if I don't want it to split that way? Let's say I want it to split, here, let me draw an ugly heart. Oh, is it gonna? No, it's gonna be ugly. Oh, I thought I'd have done a pretty one today, but no, it's gonna be ugly. That's all right. All right, so I drew a goofy heart, start, stop, stitch direction. All right, so let's say I don't want to cut it just in half. I want to make a broken heart. Okay, so how do you split it that way? All right, so first off, I'm going to use this insert splice. If I hold that button down right here, you'll see I've got insert splice, that's a straight line, or I have an insert a curve splice. All right, well, I'm going to go draw a curve I'm just drawing my little broken heart here. All right, so now I've got my little jagged broken heart line. And if you're going to leave it as a fill like this, connected one color, that's cute. Well, you can do that by each of these areas can have different stitch directions, which is kind of fun, right? So each one can have a different stitch direction. So this section does one thing, that section over there does another. Okay, so that's cute. But what if I want to split it so that each half is a different color? Okay, so select the shape, click on the point, one edge of it, hold my control key, click on the other, and then right here, split the element at selected point. Poof. Now, I don't like that color. Let's do another pink. Here we go. All right, and what if so then I can move this over if I want to do it like that, or let's say I want to rotate it around this point. I can left click on the shape. Right here is the rotation point. So if I drag that guy down here, now it's going to rotate around that bottom point. See that? All right. So what if I want to add a border? I can select the shape, hold my shift key, click on that Same with this one. Hold this, shift, and click. Now I want to move it. All right. Anyway, you get the idea. You can play with it and do whatever you want. That's fun stuff. You tell I like digitizing. Anyway. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? Okay, I think I got all the Facebook questions up to date. Let me check YouTube. All right, we split a design a few different ways, with a straight line and with a jagged line. Oh, by the way, that works with curves too. So if I didn't want straight points, I could take this, use that curve splice, left click and add, say I want it to be that shape. So again, that's just using right clicks instead of left clicks. So I can click on that, split element at selected points, and now I've got a curvy one. Cool. All right. So that's splitting up elements. What else do we have? Oh, I want to hear explanation of different types of stitches and what's the best one to use over another. So we do have some intro digitizing videos that start with the walk, talk about the walk, the columns, and then the fills. But I'll give you a brief discussion of them. So stitch types, you've got a running stitch, which is a walk stitch. All right, so what is that? It's a stitch that goes, it makes a needle penetration, jumps, makes a needle penetration. So it's one piece of thread, boom, boom, as the machine sews, it just does one stitch at a time. What is this used for? You can use it for traveling. So from going from one spot to another that gets covered over. It sews really fast, which is cool, which is why you use it for just moving through designs, because it gets sewn back over. You can use it for outlines, but keep in mind, if you're using it for outlines, one piece of thread is really thin. So you'd want it to be a little bit thicker so it shows up better. So how would you make that thicker? Well, you would take this, and instead of being a walk, you would change it to a bean. And you'll see here there's a bean thickness. What does the thickness mean? It's how many pieces of thread it's going to put at each location, right? So a bean of 3, how is that so? Well, it's going to go forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward. 1, 2, 3. We're going to waltz our way down. Forward, back, forward. So that at each one of these spots, there's 3 pieces of thread. It shows up bolder. If you've never looked at that one-day design, all the borders on that are bean stitches. So you use a bean stitch for when you're doing detail work. You don't have a lot of room for a satin stitch. Now, satin stitches are really cool. They tend to be, curvier. They're shiny. They sit on top of your fabric because there's no needle penetrations on top, in the middle of a shape. You go from one side to the next, back and forth. So they tend to kind of have a more domed look, particularly if you have nice underlay underneath it. Good morning, Georgia. From Colorado. Good morning. And Anita from Illinois. All right. So your satin stitches are here. So those are really good for lettering, for borders, for things that are not too wide, not too thin, just right. Okay. I personally use them from maybe 15 points at the narrowest. That's what I mean by that is this width. All right, so how wide that is. So too thin, if I'm going under 12, 15 points, I'm going to go to a walk stitch. If I'm over, 12, 15, I can go to a satin stitch. Up to a point. When you get too wide, you're prone to snagging, right? So once you get past 60, 70 points, the stitches get really long. So it's not really a wise idea because particularly think about a left chest. If I'm going to put a 1-inch piece of thread with no stitches in between, that's really loose. So when my pens go in there or when I wash it, it's going to be more prone to snagging. So it's not a good practice. So, generally a satin stitch is good. My experience from, 12 to 70 points. That's my personal limit. I've seen people go larger. I've seen them go smaller. It's a personal preference. So, and how your clients are using it to what makes sense. We do have a video link there for you on the different stitch types. So you've got our walking, we've got our satin, and then we have fill. So fill stitches are what you're going to use for larger coverage areas, right? So where you're going to fill in a large region. So it's going to sew in a whatever stitch direction you tell it. So that dotted line there is my stitch direction. And it does needle penetrations along the way. So it's just going to sew back and forth, jump. If I go into the properties, every 40 points or so, it's going to make a needle penetration. So it's going to jump over 40 points. So, and it's just going to keep going back and forth until it fills in the area. Now the density that you see here is how close the rows of stitching are to one another. Okay, so as it's sewing across this row, when it jumps down, it's going to be 4 points lower and it's going to sew back. So it's row to row, it's going to do 4 points. All right, so that's your fill. Fills are good. They have a flatter look, whereas your satin stitches are going to be more rounded, shinier. It's always a good idea to mix stitch types in your designs because it adds visual interest, right? So it gives you something more. You can make a design completely flat with fill stitches and it will look like a design. Good example, I'll see if I can find a picture of it later and just post it so you can see it. But like, imagine a train, right? A train silhouette. You can sew that as one flat fill. It will look like a train. It will be the silhouette of a train puffing along. But if you take the time to go add the struts in the wheels with satin stitches, to add the details around the little thing that the smoke comes out of, add some satin stitches, it's all still black. It's all still connected. It's still a silhouette, but man, it's so pretty. You can see all those details to it. So mixing stitch types is always a good way to kind of add art to what you're doing. Okay. And then, of course, you've got the other ones buried in here. So under the walk, you've got your bean, your decoratives. I cover decoratives a lot on these talks because I just love them. So you can play with these and get all, oh, it helps if I actually select what I want to modify, huh? There you go. So you can do all sorts of really cool stitches. All right, so we did all the questions on YouTube. And I'm up to date on Facebook. So let's see what other questions we have ahead of time. Is there a way to add outlines to fonts that are in DS? Yep, there is. So fonts in DS. If I go into the properties, right here you have auto borders. You can enable auto borders and it will do that. So you can adjust the width if you want them wider. You can change the density if you want them more dense or less dense. So you can play with them here and you can, all the properties can be adjusted for those borders. So yeah, you can add borders to any font and it will put them on there for you. Really easy. Properties, auto borders, enable auto borders. Okay, what else? What settings do you use for athletic block and for block 2 for names on sleeves? Really depends on the material and the size. One thing I would suggest, and I do this, I love the auto that you have now. So let's say I want to put that, right? So if I come over to block 2, I tend to use these your auto underlay and your auto top stitch for the density. And then for compensation, I'll put 1 to 2 points of offset on everything I do. It's a default. I automatically go to putting 1 point of offset on everything. It's, again, a personal preference. I know embroidery is going to shrink. It's going to narrow up. So I might as well compensate for that. So I put 1 point on everything I do. But yeah, these auto underlays and the auto density They work so well because depending on the size of what you're doing, you would actually want different densities. You'd want different underlays. So as you scale the text up and down, it's going to change accordingly based on the size of what you're working on. So that's what I would recommend, is using these autos, because that way it'll automatically go back and forth between, based on the size of what you're working on. Okay. Those were all the questions that I had sent in ahead of time. Let me make sure I didn't skip any, because I did that, talked about that, we did that. Jump stitches, we talked about those. Outlines. Yeah. All right. So those were all my questions sent in ahead of time. I'm going to quick scan through Facebook. I don't see any new ones there. I don't see any on YouTube. So I think we're good to go. So those were all the questions that we had. I'll hang on just for a second to see if any others come in. But short of that, I will be back next week. And next week will be Friday. Again, I apologize. I missed yesterday, but here we are today. Didn't want to have to rush through anything. So we do these talks every week. So let us know what questions you have. I know there is one that about the machines that I got to go look up on my machine. So if Scott or someone didn't answer you, I'll try to get an answer for you. But you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will be back next week to see what we can talk about then. All right, everyone. Till next week. Have fun sewing.